My name is Elizabeth Schaefer. I'm an editor at Del Rey who had the wonderful opportunity to work with Gwenda Bond on her book, and I will let my amazing panelists introduce themselves.
So I'm Gwenda Bond, and my book is Stranger Things, Suspicious Minds, which is a prequel set in 1969 and 1970 about Eleven's mom, Terry Ives, and how she gets embroiled in the MK Ultra experiments being run by Dr. Brenner.
I'm Brenna Yovanoff, and my book is the first Stranger Things YA. It is called Runaway Max. It will be out June 4th, and it is a little bit of a prequel about Max Mayfield before she came to Hawkins, and then a little bit of kind of her perspective on the goings-on in Season 2.
And the real cover for this was just revealed. It's so hot off the presses. We don't have it in the PowerPoint, but go online and look at it afterward. It looks amazing.
Hi, I'm Jody Houser. I've been writing the Stranger Things comics for Dark Horse. So I did the mini-series The Other Side that just came out in trade. I'm doing a free comic book day issue for May the 4th. And then just announced a few weeks ago, we have a new mini-series coming called Six.
I'm Ibrahim Moustafa, and I drew the Stranger Things free comic book day issue with Jody, and I also own all of the Stranger Things action figures.
And I'm Spencer Cushing. I'm an editor at Dark Horse Comics who works with these fine folks on all of the comics.
And I think, Spencer, you have some cool stuff to show off that's coming up.
Absolutely. So this cover you see up there is the Stranger Things exclusive cover for the first issue of the comics, done by Kyle Lambert, who did the key art for Netflix on the show. So when you're on Netflix and you see the little art that they put in the little icon, that's him. And so he's kind enough to do variant covers for us on the first series, and then this exclusive. And this exclusive glows in the dark. So if you shine lights on the logo and down in the very bright part of the bottom of the cover, it'll glow in the dark for you.
I can confirm that. I just stuck it under the table.
Legit. And here's just a couple pages of the first issue of Stranger Things. Some of you may have read it, and if not, the artist on this first series was Stefano Martino, inks by Keith Champagne, and colors by Lauren Affey, and letters by Nate Picos, and written by, of course, our very own Jody Houser. And it's been fun. So this is just a preview. You can get all 4 of the first issues of that series down at the Dark Horse booth or any comic retailer. And then the trades and stuff will be out in May.
Oh, yeah, I just said the trade was out, so ignore what I said before. I don't work for the publisher. I don't know what's going on.
Always the last to know.
That's right.
And then from Del Rey, we have another novel coming out the last week in May that's going to be focusing on Hopper's backstory and his time as a cop in New York City in 1977. And I have to show you all here this very cool poster. Yeah. So if you buy the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition, you can get your hands on this gorgeous piece of art. The story is set during the 1977 blackout in New York City, so it's very spooky atmosphere that I think the artists capture perfectly here.
And who's the artist on that cover?
Why did you ask that? Because the second I said that, I was like, and I'm blanking on the artist's name.
Oh,
I'll tweet it after the
It's
panel.
not is it the same person who did mine? No. Okay.
Anyway, it looks very good.
Spencer getting me in trouble. So obviously all of you are super talented and have lists and lists of accomplishments, but I'd love to have the audience get to know you better as people. So if you had to choose one Stranger Things character that you are the most like, not who you want to be, who you are most like, who would it be?
Oh, man.
Probably Dustin, if we're being honest, because I'm sort of like the one who gets like maybe overly enthusiastic, geeking out about stuff. So, and he's sort of like the most. If anyone's read the book Faith that I do for Valiant, it's a very similar character to Dustin, and it's also the character I write that I relate to the most. So.
I mean, I actually think it's 11 because I'm very sensitive to like if people are bullying my friends, like I would totally throw them like over a cliff or into a wall. Sadly, I can't actually do that. But also, I think we can all relate to how awkward she is trying to navigate being special and wanting to be also normal, right?
And we all have waffles.
And we all love waffles.
I think my first impulse was to say Steve because of the hair, but that's not true. I'm more of a Nancy, except that I never did my homework. But I like to solve problems, and also I'm okay with a 22. I've only shot piñatas, though.
You seem like a monster hunting type to me. Yeah.
I think I'm specifically season 2 Steve, with some Lucas tendencies, because I tend to call out things as being like, why are we doing this? So that's probably the best thing. Oh, I can also move things with my mind, though, so I should probably mention that too. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, you know.
I probably just Jonathan Byer, that sort of emo older kid with the photography camera, just going around, you know, still and cares about everybody, but you know. Sort of
Unable to express.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm a total Bob because I'm a square and I would die at the end of the season.
But we'd all be so sad.
Well, great. So all of you are not only great writers, but I think you would say you're fans of the series as well. What do you think it is that makes Stranger Things such a resonant story, not only for nerds, but seemingly just everybody?
I've thought a lot about this because have been asked this question about a dozen times a day over the last month. I actually think it's because the Duffer Brothers created a story with all the things that they love in it, that it wasn't a focus group kind of a process. It really is like it took a while for it to come together. And I think people really respond to that sort of nerdy enthusiasm. Like it has all these things that a lot of us grew up with, and teens today relate to it too, because childhood doesn't change that much.
Yeah, and I think unlike some stories, it's maybe like would lean too heavily into the nostalgia. I think they have just the right amount, and they're making sure they're still doing something new with all these like familiar threads we've seen in other stories. So it's making a cool new tapestry out of a lot of character types and story ideas and things that we all loved and grew up with.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's very recognizable, so there's an instant buy-in because of that. Like, oh, I had that, or I played that game, and then it being like just a really well-done story on top of that with a mystery that keeps you coming back for more, I think is really what gives it a lot of staying power.
And I think it's important what Jody was saying, that nostalgia that they do use, but it's not used in just like, look, we know what you like. It's, we love this stuff and we want to write a love letter to it and show you all the cool stuff that was there and just bring it back as the new tapestry, I think is a great word for it.
Also, something that I think is really amazing about the show is even though it's dealing with these huge kind of high concept ideas, monsters and telepathic powers, it's incredibly intimate. We spend these really kind of close focus moments with these characters and we get to know them really well. And so I think just giving us the chance to love these sometimes very awkward people is part of what makes it work really well.
Yeah, I mean, if the characters weren't there, I mean, I don't know if any of us would be here.
Absolutely.
And I think the boys, just kind of specifically in their case, the way they approach the problems, they have their own problems amongst each other at times as sort of internal conflict, but them as the way they approach problems as sort of heroes in the story. There's like, we gotta save our friend, we gotta go do this. No matter what, they're always that positive like hero character for these stories.
It's incredibly pure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I like that. So when you're adapting this incredibly popular series, I imagine there's sort of core themes and imagery that you want to keep, and there's also new things that you want to add. So can you talk a little bit about what you wanted to make sure was stay true to the core of the show and what you wanted to bring that was your own?
Well, I mean, for me, I love just sort of the feel of the show and the environment and how it feels like it was something maybe we did all watch on TV in the mid-'80s and then just forgot about until it came back. But I wanted to do something like that with the comic and make it feel like it was an artifact of the time, too. So we tried to do, like, older-style elements you don't necessarily see in comic storytelling these days, like the old-style thought bubbles and just, like, narrative captions and the sort of muted colors. And, I mean, I think it worked out really well. It doesn't feel dated, but it's something still that if you read comics back then that you'll recognize, and try to basically do it the same way they did it with the show.
I really wanted to preserve, to me, the friendship story is really the core element that draws me in to Stranger Things, and so I really wanted to preserve that element and give Terry a friend group of her own and a hero's journey of her own, and make it feel like a Stranger Things story. And of course, the villain of our book is human, but he is a monster, and so it's all these like the everyday alongside the supernatural, and just grounding things in the real world of that period of the late 60s was really fun, and something that I think we both wanted to do to preserve kind of the way the show approaches being a period piece.
I loved having a chance to write about Max and really kind of dig into her character and her backstory, because she's so scrappy in this way that when she first comes to Hawkins is really she is a misfit to the town because she's so defensive, and I wanted to see kind of where that comes from and how she has to transition basically to a place where people are nice to her.
So I think touching on that, one of the huge appealing parts of Stranger Things is that it's a period piece. And whether it's 1969 or 1983, I know a lot of research went into making sure that all those period details are correct. And because people notice. Can you talk about how did you go into like immersing yourself in the world of those time periods?
For me, I'm only a little bit younger than Max, so I just had to think back really hard on everything I loved as a child. And I don't know, it was really fun to get to give her some of the things that I was most excited about as a kid.
I mean, I'm a little younger than the kids, but I'm old enough. I do remember the 80s to an extent. So, it was a lot of pulling things that I was a fan of, like you were saying, and also trying to seed in some new stuff that, wasn't necessarily the same inspiration for the Duffer Brothers. So there's a sci-fi novelist I really loved as a kid who did a lot of work in the 70s and 80s named William Slater. Oh, so I put some references in there, but there was a lot of Googling because the books that were the most perfect to reference came out like 85 and 86.
I had the exact same thing. The one reference that I could not manage to squeeze into mine was I wanted to reference the Judy Blume's first book, and it actually came out in November instead of like the book ends in the late summer. And so I was like, but I was not born during the time period that I was writing about. So, but actually my mom and dad are roughly Terry and Andrew's age. And so I actually drew a lot on my mom's, like stories my mom had told me about being a woman in that era and sort of the things that you would run up against, like specifically I'm thinking about, there's a thing I put in the book about Terry not being able to have a bank account because she's an unmarried single woman without a parent to sign off on it. And that was actually something that happened to my mom, even after she was employed. So I really wanted to draw on those things, but I did immerse myself in, like I had a playlist that was only songs from 1969 and 1970. That was all I listened to while I was writing this. And I watched a ton of documentaries, read so many books about mind control research and MK Ultra. And one of the fun fact, last thing I learned that was super creepy is that there basically was a real life Dr. Brenner about a mile from my house who was one of the most notorious participants in MK Ultra, who dosed a psychiatric patient for over 100 days in a row with LSD.
Oh my gosh.
So all these weird little things, but like trying to really capture how scary those experiments were in real life.
Oh, I forgot. I had to go back and find the older edition D&D manual and like read through it because the rules have changed so much, and I'm mostly familiar with 5e, the current edition. So I had to make sure when they were talking about their campaign, because that was the one way we could sort of seed the other boys in, was Will having memories of the games he played while he's going through the Upside Down alone. So I had to make sure like all the terminology was right, and I wasn't like
I love that because
D&D
it's so you.
anachronisms.
It's so you. Like, you
Yeah.
would care about that. Like,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think half the notes I got were like, maybe he's back on the D&D a little bit. but it's cool.
I was very fortunate because shout out to whoever at Netflix does all the research for Stranger Things, because usually my job as an illustrator is that, like, I'm drawing a book that takes place in World War II, and it's just like nothing but Google image searches constantly. And they weren't exactly snapping digital photos back in the 40s, right? So whoever the wonderful folks were at Netflix who handled all that made it so that I just had to pause the show a few times because they already sourced the right couch and the right Afghan throw on the couch and the right eagle poster for the basement and all that stuff.
Right
so.
style of clothes, obviously.
Yeah.
I have a question for Spencer.
Yeah.
I was wondering, can you walk us through the development process for a comic like Stranger Things? Guys, imagine it's pretty different from doing original stuff. And
Yeah.
how did this all begin?
So basically, when we first sort of pitched to Netflix, it was soon after the show got really popular. I was absolutely stoked about the show and tried to tell everyone to watch it. But we basically created a whole pitch for Netflix saying, hey, here's what we'll do, and had some art done, within a week of, pieces that we would use. Here's the plan. Here's what we can do. And so we pitched them. They gave it to us, and then sort of came the talking to Netflix about, like, what can we do? Like, what stories can we tell? Since the show is still going on, we can't really touch on, the characters in the main show in ways that sort of affect any of the canon of the show. So you have to be very careful and balanced. Like, can we show the boys in some way so at least we can know that they're there, but without having them do anything that affects, anything that they want to do in the show. And as far as I'm aware, like, they sort of plan from season to season. There's not like as long a term, like, here's what we're going to do 5 seasons from now. So they kind of just like, all right, well, here's what happened, and now next season we'll do something different. So I think the hard part was the storyline. And with the first series, they gave us, like, here's 3 options. You guys can do, here's what Will's story was in the Upside Down during that time, which is what we ended up with. And then they gave us a couple other stories that we could look at.
I think one was similar to what we did with Will, but everything from the Demogorgon's perspective.
Right.
Which would have been cool, but I felt like Will was the one character who didn't get as much a chance to shine, so that was the one I was really psyched to do.
And I think it would have just been really hard, like, to do from the story of the Demogorgon or the Mind Flayer and be like, in his head. For me, the mystery, the beautiful reason he's a villain and, like, a crazy monster is that he's unfathomable. And I say he, but who knows? This monster. And when you remove that mystery of that in trying to figure out what it's trying to do, I think it becomes less of a good villain.
Oh yeah, no, it probably would have been a mostly silent comic.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, right.
Makes your job easier.
It would have been. I actually love writing things with no dialogue because it's like the best chance to let the art shine.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, so moving through the process, that's how Stranger Things got signed up. So for Jody and Brenna and Gwenda, can you talk about the story development and how you went about that?
Sure. So Elizabeth and I had a call, and we were pretty much in sync, like, right from the get-go. A lot of the stuff that ended up in the book we talked about on our very first call. And I had started researching the time period, and I had also gone back and reread all the early Stephen King novels.
Oh, nice.
And actually the structure of the book I stole a little bit from Stephen King. So, like, those early books, he had long chapters with numbered subdivisions, and that just seemed like just the kind of nerdy structural thing to steal for a Stranger Things project. And also I wanted to cover roughly a month, and that allowed me to kind of chunk the historical research of what was going on. So there were some things like the draft that was televised that I just felt like would make a great set piece in writing about college characters in this period. So many things suggested themselves, especially since they're in contact with the government. Because, that was just the Vietnam War was a huge part of people's daily lives when they were that age. And so we really wanted to use the time period, and we also wanted to use Dr. Brenner and show a bit more femme, but like you said, we didn't want to take all the mystery away. So the story development, it was pretty straightforward. And our Netflix consultant, Paul Reiser, who's a writer on the show, was wonderful and had great ideas, and we had a really good working relationship with him. So it was pretty ideal in terms of working with someone else's property.
I said before that it was one of the shortest editorial calls I've ever had when I first started Gwenda, because it was just, yes, that's perfect, I love it. Yep, exactly, yep.
Do that.
Oh, okay, I guess we're done. That's great.
I wish I had a more nuanced, sophisticated answer, but I knew that I wanted to write about Max because she has two passions that were my childhood loves, which are arcade games and the movie Halloween. And so it gave me a chance to write about movie monsters. I was a huge horror movie fan as a kid, and really the only disappointment was that my arcade game was Altered Beast. I was terrible at it, but I loved it so much, and it was not out yet in 1984. So I didn't get to put in Altered Beast. You don't get to kick the white wolf in Runaway Max.
I mean, we talked a bit about the development for the first series, but the upcoming series 6 was in part from reading Gwenda's outline, because I definitely wanted to do more with Brenner and his experiments in that whole world. And I mean, they've been very kind to let us have a lot of leeway in there. The one rule, because I was like, I want to do another patient, like what number can we give her? Do they have that plotted out? And the main rule was like, you can't use number 1. But so I was just like, 6 seems like a good number and seems like a good title for a series. So she's 6.
Yeah. Well, and I just to jump on that too, I think it's Paul Victor and Netflix have just been wonderful to work with. They're just incredible in terms of most of the licenses that I work on, and the fact that parts of our next series 6 do sort of intersect a little bit with Gwenda's book is just really fun, and they just play off each other in a really fun way.
Ibrahim, you didn't get out of this. I do have a question for you too. But I want to say we're going to throw to audience questions in a bit, so be thinking about brilliant, witty things to say. But so how do you develop the art on a series like this? And I'm also curious, I imagine it's really different working with characters who have to follow a certain actor's likeness versus drawing your own stuff.
Yeah, likenesses are definitely tough because you have to kind of straddle the line between not trying to just trace a photo or, pause the show and sit there and look at the screen back and forth. So you kind of have to find defining features of each person's face and then exaggerate them just a little bit. So maybe Steve's jaw is a little more square in your drawing than it is in real life or something. But it's a fun challenge because to maintain that kind of consistency, drawing after drawing, page after page, is a fun thing to keep trying to get better at. As far as developing the art, the show has such a wonderful established tone and mood, and I think Jody really picks up on that in her writing of it. So for my part, it was just about making sure that I was keeping that consistent in the art itself. So a lot of that has to do with what kind of, camera angles I choose to draw a scene from. Sometimes I'll put, like, there's one scene where Nancy and Steve are coming down the stairs to the basement, and I kind of made it a spooky, long shadows, and then the D&D figurines are in the foreground as kind of the focal point and stuff like that. So it was a fun chance to sort of, insert myself into that environment that I've been watching for 2 seasons, multiple times, and then kind of just turn the camera around to where I would want to focus if I were in that room. It was a really fun experience and a fun challenge to try to figure out a new spin on it without deviating too far from the source material.
Yeah, and we've worked together before, so
Yeah.
I think that helps too. If you're doing something a little bit different, to have at least one sort of consistent, like, what my scripts look like.
Right,
So hopefully that
exactly.
helped a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. Well, if anyone has any questions, if you want to come down to the microphone in the center of the room, and I'll vamp while we wait.
Come
The
on.
answer
Come
to
on.
questions.
Don't be shy.
They know it all.
They're very friendly, I promise. Well, I don't know. Yeah, come on. What? No, you have to be.
All right.
Tell us about the titles of the books and what they mean.
Okay, so the gentleman in the back asked, tell us about the titles of the books and what they mean. And I think he's referring to the Del Rey novels specifically. So the first one is called Suspicious Minds, which
Was Elvis's #1 hit single in 1969, and in a realm of great music, probably the only song title besides "Evil Ways" by Santana that would have been appropriate for the book.
that's the alternate universe, like Revenge
And I
of the
had to
Dead.
say, these guys came up with that idea of using a song title. I had sent them a bunch of titles, which, were not quite right. And
all
I think it was
great.
brilliant, though, the idea of using song titles.
And so the second book is Darkness on the Edge of Town, which of course is the Springsteen album from 1977, which is when the book is set. And I just, obviously Hopper would be a Springsteen fan. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
oh
just
yeah.
not surprising to anybody.
Oh, no, I wish we would use song titles for
I know. It's too clever.
Yeah, the first miniseries that came out is called The Other Side because it's Will's perspective of everything that happened in season 1. So it's pretty much all takes place in the Upside Down. So I'm just like, The Other Side, that's cleverish. But no, song titles are better.
Isn't that a Doors song? Break on through to the other side. What's that song?
Oh,
Yes, yes, that is the retcon. That is totally right.
Yeah, you meant to do that. That's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, totally.
Thank you for reminding me. I had totally forgotten. Wink, wink.
I don't think I can retcon Runaway Max to be a song title. I wish I could. If you can grab a copy of the chapter sampler and read it, it will become readily apparent why this book is titled what it is, but we wanted to have a title that conveys kind of like this intense, full-bore velocity that Max has also.
Nice.
Well, actually, I do have another question about, I know, Gwenda, you were able to create a lot of original characters, and I think there's a few new folks showing up in your books as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you chose to add those people to the narrative and what you like about them? Because I love Alice, and I want you to talk about Alice.
Alice is my favorite. So, actually, they're all my favorite. I love writing a Scooby Gang. I love writing friendships. And that was really like the very first thing that I had was sort of, and I've also really wanted to write a girl gang book for a while. And so it felt like, I could kind of use show a core friendship, but centered with more women. So it's sort of similar to the show, but also like a different thing as well. And so Alice and Gloria were the first characters that I created, and then Goofball Ken came along later when I realized I needed like a comic relief kind of character. Although I feel like he grew on me a lot. But yeah, Alice has some special abilities, but is also like a townie. And is anybody familiar with Breaking Away, the movie set in Bloomington that's about bicycle racing?
Yeah.
So that Alice as a reference is basically inspired by that because the limestone quarry workers, her family, she comes from a family of limestone quarry workers. And of course, in the movie, they're cutters. That felt like a very Stranger Things kind of little Easter egg to slip in there because that's like the only famous movie that's set in Bloomington. So Alice is just like, she just was one of those weird characters. The minute I started writing her, she was just there on the page. Like her introductory scene is perfect. And then Gloria was a little harder to crack. I actually wrote a friend of mine, Tim Hanley, who's a comics historian, because I felt like something was missing, and her family owned a store, and so I felt like they would probably be selling comic books, and so she could be a comic book reader. And so I asked him, like, what books would she be? This is the character, what I know about her right now. What books do you think she would be reading? And he sent me back like this 3,000-word essay with options, and I'm like, X-Men, great, because that seemed like perfect nod back to the show. And she's a scientist, and I could obviously talk about these characters forever. I love them, and I hope you guys love them too.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. You were going to answer that same one, and then I will.
I will answer it briefly because I want to hear this
take your time.
question.
Take your time.
I do not actually have that many original characters in Runaway Max, but I was able to give Max's stepbrother Billy a couple friends back when they are in California that are kind of a nod to the absolute terror that I had as a child of teenage boys in my neighborhood.
Oh, no.
And so Sid and Wayne are baby Brenna's phobia of rough boys who live down the street.
And just, not specific say, because it's a bit till the book comes out, but I'm pretty sure there might be more original characters in 6 than series characters. So there's a lot of new faces in there.
Oh, I forgot to mention too, I also got to create Eleven's dad, her biological dad, who I really love, and yeah, he's great.
So I'm curious, when working within a sort of allotted point in time in the series history, and I think everyone here is a fan of the show, so that when an opportunity like this comes along, what is the process like with developing the idea? When somebody says, for example, Jody, like, okay, what's Will's experience? Do you instantly start getting ideas? Is there do you do some research first? Do you rewatch the show and then start to ruminate on that? Can you kind of walk us through your process on that?
Oh, I mean, since the first series that we did takes place during the span of the first season, it was definitely going back and watching the show, and I'm like a continuity nerd. I don't know why I write comics. It's like not a good place for that. But yeah, just making sure that everything lined up and that, Will was in a place when they heard his voice, that he could be speaking into something that would let them hear his voice, and that, he's doing a lot of running around in there because you got to stay one step ahead of the big monster that's chasing you. But we were able to find enough space to put some fun things in there that I think sort of did a little half turn on some of the episodes in the series, because it's a little bit of a spoiler, but in the 3rd issue we learned that Will was actually in the woods when Nancy was, and he's the reason Nancy was able to get out. But that went from like watching that episode and that scene, and it was kind of not clear how she was able to get away, because the Demogorgon was like that close, but like then just didn't see her. So I'm like, what if Will was being a hero in that moment? So, we got to play around with fun stuff like that, but it definitely is like going back and doing the rewatching and just figuring out where to slot new story moments in and what you can use that was already established.
Yeah, there were some good conversations about that, and that hero moment for Will, it was just perfect. It was like he needs to have something in the whole series.
Terry's a difficult character in some ways because we know that she has this very tragic outcome. And we knew the book would be sad, but we didn't want it to be just unrelentingly sad. And we really wanted to give Terry some wins and give her a story of her own. And we get it was really actually, it's the perfect amount like for a jumping off point to create a character, because everything we get of her in the show is basically her fighting, right? Fighting against these huge forces. And though she doesn't win, even when she's, kind of in her vegetative state almost, she's able to communicate with her daughter when she shows up and give her pertinent information. Like, that is a fighter. And so that was really the starting point for her. And then it's, to give her a full life in the time that she has before this tragic thing happens, was really kind of the jumping off point. But I actually like having a starting point, and so I do get ideas almost immediately for both this and Lois Lane. Pretty much the first ideas I had were what I went with, and that's kind of the signal to me that it's the right property for me to work in, because I have to be able to, if I was sitting there going, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I think I would be like, maybe I'm not the right person for this.
I obviously had a lot more to work with starting out than Gwenda, because Max is a pretty strong secondary character in the second season, but I did come at it from a really similar vantage point, where I went through the show and was looking for anything that seemed like the tip of an iceberg, anything that seemed to promise more questions, to kind of triangulate who this person actually is based on these very kind of sprinkled bits of information about her.
That was a good question, Evie.
Good question.
Thanks.
Do you have any other? Oh, I see a gentleman coming on down.
I had a question just for basically everybody. So working with a licensed property, like, you probably answered this in one way or another already, but like, how difficult is it to get to that point? Like, I'm an aspiring writer. I've self-published a few books. but like how is it that you came to be discovered by Del Rey and by Dark Horse?
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I think I've been so lucky with the authors that I've been able to work with, but when I'm looking to hire someone for a project, they need to have a long track record of publishing their own original work, a history of being, I know this is a phrase we don't love, but I don't know a better way to say it, but easy to work with. You can't be precious about the characters or your story because it doesn't belong to you. So you have to be able to tell a really good story within some parameters. And you also need to be able to write so fast because of the way these things go together. You're usually following the lead of a movie or a TV show that's in development. So there are certain characters or plot points you might have to wait for until you're able to start writing. And by that point, your window for writing the book is pretty small. Gwenda wouldn't know anything about that.
I had a luxurious month for the first draft.
I mean, and that just, if I'm just gonna fangirl here, and that just speaks to your talent, that this book is amazing, and you were able to pull it off in such a short amount of time.
I made a murder wall with all the scenes on the wall. That's the only reason.
Did it have Christmas lights too?
Actually, a friend of mine made like a thing, and like who's into comics made a thing with the Christmas lights, and I did have it like on the wall underneath.
My mind is still kind of blown that I got to do this, but it was almost entirely due, I think, to the fact that my editor who edits my own books and I spent like an hour after the first season came out just talking about how cool the show was instead of talking about the work we were supposed to be doing together. And so when the project came up for Random House, I got to be the first person she thought of because we had been so excited about the show.
And I've done a lot of licensed books, and I mean, right now I think everything I'm doing is a licensed book. But I pretty much got started in comics doing short stories for anthologies, so I built up, a body of work that I could show editors doing that, and I was very lucky to work with some amazing artists very early on. I include my first published comic story, Fiona Staples drew part of it. So, that's something editors will actually look at that because they just want to see the art, at least, if nothing else. And the first actual book I did was Orphan Black for IDW, so I think I very early on got established as someone who worked with licensed properties. And I mean, at the current moment, I'm doing Stranger Things, obviously, Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, Critical Role. So it's just, I keep building up a body of work, and I guess I haven't screwed up anything enough that people don't want to work with me. Well, that was actually a question for you. Like, Spencer, had you seen any of my Stranger Things posts and stuff when you reached out to me? Like, did you know I was a fan of the show?
I don't know if I did know you were a fan of the show as well.
I dressed as 11 for 2 Halloweens in a row. The second season came out, I think, the day before my big Halloween party, and I was like, I have a blazer exactly like she wears in her punk makeover, so I threw out my costume plans and just wore that. But no one at the party had gotten that far into the show yet. So the only person who knew what I was is my friend who is a producer on Stranger Things. So she recognized it.
Everyone was just worried about your nosebleed at the party.
Yeah. So I just left that up as my profile picture for everyone to catch up and be like, oh yeah. And then I got the book.
Jody and shoulder pads.
And then I got the book. So then I just left it up for as my profile. I think it still is my profile picture actually. But yeah, and then the preview. I actually shaved my head to do 11.
Wow.
But I realized I had everything 11 wore in the first season, but all in red and black. So I just got a red lightsaber and I was Sith 11. But yeah, so that was just a happy coincidence then, I think that, and I assume it's because of my history doing licensed books.
Yeah.
And I'd actually worked with Spencer before on a Halo issue, so.
Yeah.
Well, I think with regards, getting into anthologies is a great way to start getting your work out there, especially in a quicker, easier format for editors to digest. I've done a fair amount of licensed stuff. Like I write and draw some James Bond comics, and the Fleming estate is very stringent about what you can do with Bond. Especially the version we're doing now is like Bond's history in World War II in the Navy, leading up to becoming an MI6 agent. And so that affects the official Fleming canon of the novels, right? So it's very, very particular what you can and can't do. So I would say a bit of advice there, be very flexible, because sometimes there's a thing that this is the greatest idea I've ever had, and then it gets to the licensor for approval and they just shoot it down. And it's not there's no malice behind it. It's just, this doesn't work because X, Y, Z or whatever. So, as you develop your writing, just make sure that you're pressure testing it with other people and that you're not too, precious about any of it, because it can get shot down real quick.
Yeah, I mean, especially on the comic side, because it's like we're working with the publisher and the licensor, and then, sometimes actors have to sign off on likenesses, so there's
Right.
just so many steps of approvals and notes.
You can't be too, like, this is my idea and I'm going to hold on to it, because you've got to be able to have 10 ideas if you need to, and be into all of them.
Yeah.
You have to, part of the fun of doing these kind of projects is the collaboration. And you do have more support from your editor, I think, as you're writing and in the outline development process. And I actually really enjoy that give and take. Like, it's a nice contrast to working on your own stuff where you're kind of just like,
Yeah, I would almost compare it. I feel like licensed fiction is almost more like a TV's writer's room
Absolutely.
than
Yeah.
it is like writing a traditional novel.
Yeah. It's sort of both, because you don't have other people in the room with you when you still end up doing all the writing, but but you do feel more supported. Like, there's definitely an analogy to be made there. Yeah.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you're a part of a franchise brand, and what you do reflects on that. So, the most important thing is to be giving them the type of material that they want to further the story that they're building overall.
Right, and at the end of the day, you want to make the fans happy because you are one, right? Like, and we're all, I'm sure, keenly aware that there are many writers who would kill us to take our places.
I was watching my back after the comic got announced.
Seriously, this is one of the few things where I've had lots of friends text me and be like, congratulations, I'm so jealous. and so you are aware of that, and you want to do the best job that you can and give fans something special, because you know that other people would love to have the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a privilege you can't take
It
for
is,
granted
yeah,
at all.
yeah.
Because again, your friends will murder you if you like it.
And also, you don't want to be the person who writes a crappy book in a world that people love, right?
Yeah.
If you think my book is crappy, don't tell me. Just keep it to yourself.
Do we have any other questions?
Thank you, by the way, for
Thank you.
yours. Yeah.
Well, I think if that's it, thank you guys so much for coming out. I want to ask where people can find you at the show. I think, Jody, you're at table.
I'm at F9 in Artist Alley, which is actually just sort of right in the Artist Alley there. So, and I have some fun stuff, and yeah.
Great. And Ibrahim, you're at C1. I think.
C1.
Great. And I know Gwenda has another signing at 1:30 and 6:30 in the Writer's Block autographing area if you want to meet her. And Brenna and Spencer, where can people say hi to you?
Down at the Dark Horse booth, I think it's 2208. But we have the exclusive covers there and other Stranger Things stuff. And they're a big old this is on a big old Stranger Things wall. So come take a look.
Does that one glow in the dark too, or is it
No,
just
unfortunately. That would have been amazing.
Oh,
They
and
don't ever turn the lights off down there.
Yeah.
I forgot to add, I'm actually on a panel later today that's all about working with IPs, so doing licensed work. So if you want to hear more writers talking about more properties, it is 4:15 in room WSCC 3B. I don't know where that is. I'll have to figure that out before 4:15.
I do not have a signing today, but if you want to hit me up right after the panel, I do have a handful of these chapter samplers, and I would gladly give you one until I run out. I don't think I have enough for everyone. But
Oh, and
if you
I'm on the
hurry-
game show panel after this, where Del Rey is giving away a bunch of books. So if anyone wants to go to another panel, it's like a
Geek Revolution, come to it. It's going to be so much fun.
That does sound
A game show where you win books is like the best.
Yeah, that's so great.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you guys so much for coming out.
Thank you, everyone.